Welcome to today's seminar on the Kaiser Years. In this session, we will examine how to answer exam-style questions on two differing interpretations. This seminar will be divided into 4 parts. Firstly, we will read and annotate the two interpretations. Then we will examine how they are different in their opinions of life during World War I. We will then delve into why they are different in their opinions. Finally, we will decide which interpretations provides the best, or rather the most convincing, interpretation of life in Germany during World War I. Start by reading Interpretation A. What can you learn about the author? I find that visualizing the author helps me to understand their point of view. I imagine that during the war this man was already middle-aged, he was a farmer, he grew his own vegetables, and he lived in Bavaria surrounded by beautiful mountains. I imagine his life might not have changed too dramatically as a result of the war. Now read Interpretation A. Again, try to pick out key things you can learn about the author. This time, I imagine she is much younger. A teenager. I imagine the smoke from chimneys surrounding her since she lived in the capital of Berlin. I imagine that she was miserable for those 4 long years of World War I. Now we have read and annotated the interpretations, let's examine how they are different. This is the question you will need to answer. How does Interpretation B differ from Interpretation A, about life in Germany during World War I? It is worth 4 marks, so you should aim to write a short paragraph. Now select a quote that shows the author's point of view. I have selected the phrase, "We had every faith in the Kaiser." The word "every" suggests that it was not just the author who had this opinion. Now select a quote from Interpretation B that shows a contrasting opinion. I have chosen the phrase, "our morale declined," because this suggests she and others in her community had lost faith in the Kaiser's government. Now write a single sentence that sums up the difference in opinion. Now develop it further. Try to use a quote from each interpretation to show their differences in opinion. Now we have examined how the two interpretations are different. It is time to explore why. The next question is, why might the author of interpretations A and B have a different interpretation about life in Germany during World War I? Again, it is only worth 4 marks, so aim to do a short paragraph. Pick one thing from the provenance that informs interpretation A's opinion. I have chosen his location, rural Bavaria. Now choose something from interpretation B's provenance that contrasts with this. The most obvious contrast is that she lived in Berlin during the war. It is worth noting that the provenance will often give you more information than you actually need to answer this question. Do not get distracted. Focus on one clear difference in the two authors' experiences. Now write a sentence to explain why the two authors arrived at different opinions. Now see if you can use quotes from each extract to develop this simple point into an explanation. Now we have examined how and why they are different. Let's move on to the more advanced question: which interpretation best represents life in Germany during World War I? The question is worth 8 marks and simply asks, which interpretation do you find more convincing about life in Germany during World War I? For this, you need to cross-reference the opinion given with your contextual knowledge of the topic. Firstly, decide which interpretation is more convincing. Then write an opening sentence that gives a simple statement about why it is more convincing. Now use your contextual knowledge to justify your opinion. Here are some prompts from the previous lecture to help you. Now see if you can explain why this makes your chosen interpretation better. Consider their experiences, and how many others in Germany would have had a similar experience to them. If time allows, you can then follow the same steps to write about the second interpretation. Remember, the question asked you which interpretation was more convincing. Both interpretations provide a first-hand account. Just because one opinion better represents the mood of the German people does not mean that the other opinion is completely invalid. You can see in my explanation here how I have justified my opinion, by saying that interpretation A may have fallen victim to government propaganda and had limited access to accurate information about the war. However, I've recognized in the final two sentences how this was the case for a large portion of German people who lived in rural areas. For these people, the defeat in World War I did come as a genuine shock. Thank you for listening to this seminar. Try to revisit the steps I have shown you in this video whenever you are approaching an interpretation-style question. The most important thing to remember is that the third question, that asks you to arrive at a judgment about which interpretation is most convincing, is worth the same amount of marks as the how and why questions combined. Therefore, you need to ensure plenty of time to answer it. You also must use your own knowledge in this third question to gain the higher marks in your exam.